You have said that we will not achieve our aspirational goals without a strong and continuing partnership with the state of Minnesota. Last year, CFO Richard Futzenreuter declared a dramatic and permanent reset of the university's sources of revenue, referring to the state's cumulative drop in university funding. Yesterday, Provost Sullivan wrote in an email, "As I've said before, our mission is clear, our goal unchanged. If the legislature does not sign on to the higher education renaissance, what will happen to the strategic positioning agenda?"
Organizations like the University of Minnesota are going to be much stronger if they have a real clear sense of what they want to accomplish in the future. In fact, there's some evidence that private sector businesses and nonprofits like the University of Minnesota do better when they have a plan of action and they have a sense of how to set their priorities. I don't think
this is an excellent example of the president's common tactic of avoiding the original question. Has anyone ever seriously argued that having a long-term plan is unnecessary for an institution like the university?
The fact that you have budget reductions is any call to retreat from your aspirational goals. But the sort of new normal that I've talked about, the sort of resetting of state support, is basically a long-term trend, but it's taken a really dramatic dip in the last 10 years. And it's a call to examine the priorities of the university to see if we should do everything we're currently doing in all the various places in the state that we now conduct our business.
I am glad, Mr. President, that you admit that this is a long-term problem that has been going on for the last 10 years, not just the last few. That being the case, I think it can be argued that you have exacerbated the problem in some of the ways that you have chosen to spend the people's money during your tenure.
So it is a call for us to step up and to, I think, make some sacrifices, set priorities, and really, having said that, I think the state still needs to be a steadfast partner. And the argument I would make with the state of Minnesota is you're not just any state. You are in the middle of the country. You have arguably one of the best public research universities in the world. It is one of the most important, including this state still, with all of these cuts, funds its higher education system at a more generous level than is typical of the national average.
Bob, you're simply not painting a clear picture here. First, the state legislature has already declared your original call for a new covenant dead on arrival. And you also admit that support from the state is not out of line compared to other state universities. So the reaction from the general public to your request is not particularly favorable.
So keeping that strong commitment, that historically strong commitment, and getting the state to sort of revisit higher education as a priority in this century, I think is a top priority for all of us. I think the strategic positioning agenda is something that we have to still stay with and we have to pursue, but we won't be able to pursue all the priorities we might pursue. We'll have fewer academic programs. We'll have deeper investments in some areas than others.
And how exactly will these decisions be made, Mr. President? Will it be by executive fiat, as in the attempt to rub out the graduate school? An attempt that did not follow the Regent's policy on shared governance? Nor did the reorganization of the AHC and the medical school, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of the med school faculty would prefer a full-time dean.
Provide a world-class education to your students and to be a partner for the public good. So I think it's a false choice.
A false choice? This kind of straw man rhetoric is unfortunately all too common from the president. When some of us pointed out that a more reasonable goal for the U of M was to be one of the best public universities in the Big Ten, we were called doubters by President Bruininks. This administration is fond of pointing to the mountaintop 100 miles away over rough terrain while refusing to recognize that the groundlings have no shoes. As the Daily put it during the first semester, as for commitment to quality education at an affordable cost, meaningless drivel the administration has flatly failed on its promises of excellence and affordability. So even the Daily Reporter was starting to despair over getting an answer out of the president. He prods, and what happens? The president starts talking about cutting costs.
Is it realistic to say that you'd have to give up on parts of the agenda? And if
Yes.
so,
Yes.
if so, what parts would you look
Well,
at first?
I've always been pretty tenacious in trying to cut costs. And so one of the things I think we really need a serious conversation about at the university, and it's already started, it has been going on for at least my tenure as president, is how do we redesign the academic programs of the university and the business and service operations of the university so we can get a lot more done with less money.
Well, that is wonderful. It should have been going on all along. It is also nothing to brag about as a strategy, and it still does not answer the question.
That's, if you spend $100 million on energy, you ought to ask yourself, can you spend that money more prudently? If you buy $750 million of goods and services every year, can you save 10% of that or 5% of that over some period of time? So you'll notice in the State of the University address, I put a lot of emphasis on driving down costs, because every time you drive down costs, you save resources that can be budgeted and invested in people and invested in programs. And if you do that wisely, you can not only sort of stem the bleeding that comes from budget cuts, but you can actually grow your revenues. For example, it's no accident that the University of Minnesota has led the Big Ten in competing for grants and contracts through the Federal Stimulus Act.
Mr. President, wake up. This is important. Every time the university starts to brag about money from the federal government, they should also be required to state how much these grants and contracts actually cost the university. Yes, I said that, cost. The dirty little secret that the Futzenrooters of the world don't seem to understand or are unwilling to admit is that research costs money to perform, even if it is supposedly being paid for by the government, and even if there is overhead attached. The best estimate that I can find for public universities is that a grant actually costs the university about 30% of its nominal value. This is a fundamental problem, and it has to be recognized and dealt with honestly by the university. Grants and contracts do not pay for new buildings, and when they are being touted as somehow growing revenues, this simply is not true.
So by investing in people and investing in the support of people, we're actually growing resources from other sources. So it's not, I mean, the state issue is really important, and we need to keep our eye on it, and we need to keep this partnership as strong as we possibly can. But we need to keep our eye on the fact that 80% of our budget is not state revenue. And we have more control of how we compete for that 80% than we do for the 20. And so to me, it's about redesigning programs, making choices.
And so, did you hear an answer to the original question in this kill the clock performance? I didn't.